done. Okay, got that fixed. All right, sorry about that. Anyway, things that are happening with me and Chris here is we purchased the Paquette Microphone Museum, and we're still unpacking the boxes. There's about 2,000 or maybe 2,500 items that we're unpacking, and I'm inventorying and checking some appraisal numbers to see what exactly we got. It's very exciting, and we're building the museum into our new studio here in Ashland, Oregon, and it's turning out to be quite spectacular. And if I can, I'll turn on a different camera here. It's kind of janky, but let me do it right now, and I'll give you a little tour of our construction project here. All right. Hang on, here we go, second camera coming. All right, hi. So you can see we're building in a big display for about 1,800 microphones. We're still unpacking. Over here on this side of the room is the new studio. You can see I've got a loop trotter console there and a WEM, but soon the Rupert Neve 5033 is coming. I'm very excited about that. And I brought out a couple mics here that I wanted to talk about just before we started question and answer. So let's begin with that, if you don't mind. I think probably several people are familiar with this mic, and it's a CMV3 made by Telefunken. This is one that came with the museum. And I always thought, well, this is a very early, if not the first generation of condenser microphone. But in fact, I have learned, and I am continuing to learn about microphones. It turns out that one of the earliest condensers, if not the first, was designed by E.C. Wendt for, I believe, Westinghouse. And that was this capsule right here. And this is put into an amplifier, built into an amplifier in a wooden box. Now this is a condenser mic. It had a power supply in the box and then the capsule. And then as time progressed, this configuration was built into a tombstone like this. This is also from the museum. This is actually a Remler mic. And then the tombstone was popular for a while. I got to be careful not to knock over some mics. I'm going to put this over here. Hang on. And then after that, let's see. Then these canisters were used. This is another General Electric or Westinghouse microphone condenser with the E.C. Wendt capsule. But then Western Electric really did it right. When they made this, it was a 47A amp with that capsule in it. And then this was suspended. I don't know if you can even see it. Let me see that camera. Here it is. This big old thing. Look at that. It hangs down. Well, my camera is pretty awful, but it's a big canister. All right, enough of that. What happened after that, though, is very interesting. The canisters got smaller and smaller. So the next generation looked more like this. This is also a Western Electric with a 640 AA capsule. So the capsule became very small. And I take the cover off that. You can see the microphone capsule. And then it became smaller when it was in this configuration. Same 640 AA capsule, but a much smaller body for the amplifier. And then finally, you get the type of microphone that pretty much everyone is familiar with. And it's a much smaller mic. And this is pretty much like what we see today. This again has the 640 AA condenser capsule on it by Western Electric. Western Electric, as it turns out, I'm going to switch cameras again. Western Electric, as it turns out, was at the forefront of condenser microphone design. Anyway, I'm just sharing a little bit of what I'm learning here at the Microphone Museum. As we're building the new studio, I'll have a lot more information to talk about ribbons and crystal mics and carbon mics. And there's a whole world out there that I thought I knew about mics, but I'm still learning. Anyway, I'd love to take some of your questions, and I'll just grab something here off of the screen. Someone asked about the hardest mix that I've had to do. I do a lot of mixing now, hybrid, which is using a Dangerous Music complete system. So I'm using their summing mixer and sending stems out through the summing mixer to give it more air and more depth. It really helps to send these stems out analog and then have them come back combined digitally back into the Pro Tools system for printing. So these mixes, the biggest challenge that I had recently was with a record by Taylor Hawkins, and he's the drummer from the Foo Fighters. And they sent over a song that they asked me to mix, and it was a challenge. The tracks were chaotic, kind of unmanicured or unorganized, and they knew it. Taylor said, you know, this is a mountain to climb, and go ahead and try it. So at first I thought, well, I'm going to make it a traditional mix. I'm going to make everything good so you can hear everything and balance everything and make sure all the tracks are in. But then I thought to myself, well, I'm probably competing with a bunch of other mixers here, so why don't I do something different? So I actually tore out a bunch of stuff. I did some breakdowns. I removed some parts. I moved some parts around. I created some events in the mix so that it was more interesting, and it changed the song quite a bit. And I thought, well, you know, why not? What do I got to lose? So I had fun with it, and I did some very creative and unusual things in the mix. It was difficult, mainly because I had to let go of my preconceptions on what a mix should be. And there was a bit of nervousness because here's a high-end client. I don't want to screw up. You know, I want this gig. But I thought, well, I'm just going to do my thing. And because of that, Taylor and everybody really loved it, and they hired me for the whole record. So I got the whole gig, which I was pretty excited about. And the record came out great. What a great record. It's the new Taylor Hawkins record. Anyway, thanks for that question. Let's see who else is here. Oh yeah, the Rupert Neve console that's coming. Now I had a vintage Neve. I had a 16 bus custom 80 series. So this was from 1972. It was a fantastic console. I've had it since the early 90s. So, I mean, it's been a part of my life almost 30 years. Really attached to that console, but recently I decided I wanted to condense my studio. There's actually 2 rooms that I work out of, but we're building this new mix room, and I wanted to put something special in it. So I sold the Neve. I sold the old one, and I'm getting a new Rupert Neve 5088. It's 5088. Right, not a 33, right. Anyway, it's not here yet, 2 weeks away. It's a Shelford, and it's got the fantastic EQ. So I'm excited about it. And it'll be right here in this room, along with all these microphones. And we'll be tracking and mixing everything. It's the best of all worlds right here. So I'm excited about that. Let's see what other questions we have.
Did you ever go through a phase where you didn't like your work? Ah, the question is, was there ever a phase where I didn't like my work? Well, pretty much go through that every time I mix. There's mixing, there's a curve in mixing where you start, you're excited, everything makes sense, and then you reach that point in the mix where you're completely unsure of your of what you're doing, and it doesn't sound right. And you have to, at that point, step away from the mix, take a little break, come back, and pretend you're listening to the song for the first time. Now that gives you the perspective of a listener, on a playlist, someone who's never heard the song before. Give it that kind of listen and see if it holds up. The other thing I do is I bring myself back down to earth by comparing my mix to other popular music mixing by other people. I want to make sure that at least I'm competitive, or I'm not flying off into some direction where I really don't know where I'm at. So I will often use other mixes, other people's mixes as reference for my own mixes. That brings me back down to earth. It's surprising what happens when you do that. Now, I'm not copying other people's mixes, but I want to reference how much low end, where is the thump? Am I getting the thump that I need on the low end? And is there a scoop in the middle that I'm missing? So some of the stuff that I listen to is already mastered. So in essence, I'm doing a little pre-mastering when I'm doing that reference listening. Other than that, I have to love and hate everything that I've done previous. There's styles of music which come and go also that sometimes I regret having worked on. There's some rock rap that I cringe when I listen to it today, but it's all worthy, right? A way to avoid that is to always keep versatile, try different types of music, never get pigeonholed into one style of music, and then you won't have that kind of ickiness later when you realize your style of music has become unpopular. Let's see what other kind of question I have here. What's your workflow when you're mixing drums? Where's your starting point? Overheads first. The question is, how do I put together a mix on drums? Well, typically, but not always, this is how I approach a mix. First of all, I want to listen to everything in a rough picture. I want to kind of get an idea of what all is there before I start honing into individual parts. So I push up, let's say, virtually, I push up all the faders and I listen to everything because now it's all in the box. So I open up all the tracks and I kind of do a rough mix that way and listen to all the parts and kind of do a rough positioning. Okay, now I mute everything except for the drums. And I start with kick and snare. A lot of times with live drums, I will augment those drums with samples. And I use Trigger 2 by Slate, and I have my own library of samples that I've recorded. I'll also use a sample of a good strong kick and a good strong snare from the session that I'm mixing, so that will also give it consistency if I have that going through and triggered by the live drums. Because a lot of times, depending on the drummer, the drums can be very inconsistent, and some hits louder than others, and you can really tell. And when you're in a mix, you can really hear that stuff. So I'll try to get everything consistent by adding some augmenting of samples, sample kick and sample snare, also toms. Depending on the engineer, toms are difficult to record, and so I will try to augment all the toms individually with a tom that I have a sample of in my library that's a similar pitch. I try to pitch it into as close as possible the pitch of the tom that I'm mixing. So kick and snare and toms typically are the first things that I put in and I balance. And when I mix the toms, I also start with everything in mono. I don't pan the toms because I want to make sure that in mono everything is equal. So the high toms, the low toms, I'll start with everything in mono, and that way I have a good starting point, and I make sure all the hits are strong or consistent at least. And then I'll add in the overheads, and I'll typically add in the overheads to give the entire kit depth and sparkle. So that's where my high end comes from. I also use on the kick a subharmonic synthesizer. And I think the one that I'm currently using is Low Air, which is a Waves plugin. Yeah. But there's other subharmonic synthesizers, and I'll simulate an octave down from the pitch of the kick just to give it that oof, that real right in the chest feeling. And when I'm mixing the drums also, I start at an average level, and then I bring it up to a loud level on my monitors so that I can feel that thump. And then I'll bring it down to the very quiet level so that I can hear the individual crashes. And the hat usually I'll add in last because the hat can be overwhelming. And sometimes if I've got good overheads, I don't even need the hat track to be in the mix at all. But those are some tips for how I approach drums. I'm sure there's things that I'm missing. I'm sure if we were sitting together in the studio, then I'd show you all kinds of things that I'm missing now. But it's a start. Let's see what other kind of questions we have. All right. Shelford. Somebody else likes Shelfords too. Let's see. Marcus. 5088, yes. Organize your tracks. Ooh. All right. When I'm mixing in the box, because I'm not really mixing in the box, but I arrange the mix in the box. So initially, I group all the instruments into different stems, groups. So the drums are all being mixed through a pair of internal buses, digital buses. The bass has a pair of digital buses, and on, all through the lead vocals and then the backing vocals. And then those buses, those sums, then are sent out of the computer into the Dangerous Music summing mixer, the Mix Bus Plus. And that just brings it all together. The great thing about the Mix Bus Plus also is that it has an insert button so that when I am mixing and everything comes out analog, now I push that insert button. Now I can insert any kind of analog device into that into the Mix Bus. So typically there's, you'll use actually Dangerous Music has a fantastic compressor, stereo compressor, and an EQ. It's called the Bax EQ, which gives everything a nice smile. It's very simple, but it's great for pre-mastering and mastering for that matter. But the thing that I like to do on the Mix Bus is I'll add a pair of 111C Western Electric transformers, these old telephone transformers that are just big old honking metal things. I wonder if I got them around here, if I can see them. Oh, I'll go grab them right now. Hang on. Hang on, I'm coming back. All right. Hi. These are Western Electric 111C transformers. They're passive. And I just put them across the stereo bus through the liaison and the dangerous music system. And then it just gives the mix this big, gritty, kind of muscly iron sound. It's really good. So a friend of mine, Devin Powers, turned me on to this. This is gold right here. Thank you, Devin. Anyway, so that's some of what I do. So I organize all the tracks into different sums or buses, and then they all get mixed into the analog summing through the Dangerous Music Mix Bus Plus, and then I route them through some inserts, stereo bus compression, and these Western Electric passive transformers, and then they come back into Pro Tools, and then I print my mix there. So I guess that's pretty much it. There's a lot to splitting out all your tracks into these buses, these stems, and then having them blended by analog, that hybrid approach. It just makes a huge difference. I had before I got the hybrid mix from Dangerous Music, I was mixing entirely in the box, and I thought I was doing a good job. The clients seemed to really like what I was doing. But then one particular client, I finished an album, and actually, I think I put in the new system, and I had to do a recall on one of the songs on that album that I'd mixed in the box. And the recall, I put it through the analog summing, and it just made it three-dimensional. It was a humongous difference, so much so that when I sent the mix to the client, the client was remarking on how good it sounded and how even better it sounded than before. And then I told the client, well, we're just putting this new system, and perhaps I should put all the rest of the mixes through that system too. I did that, and what happened, it kind of backfired on me because the client loved the new sound so much, and there was so much more clarity and depth that the client gave me like 4 pages of notes for each song on what to change, because they could hear all the stuff that they couldn't hear before. So it kind of backfired on me. I kind of regret that one. But from here on out, I'm just using this Dangerous Music. It's called the Dangerous Music Mix Master Complete. And it has the D to A converters. It has A to D converter. It has the liaison, which is the insert where you can put in the compression, the back EQ, and whatever else you want. The Mix Bus Plus, which is the summing. And then I also have a monitoring system, the Monitor SR, Monitor ST is what I use for monitoring, and that I can't live without that. Anyway, big plug for Dangerous Music. Love them. Let's see what else we have for questions. Let's see. All right. Oh, how does one stay relevant? Wow, that's a good one. Well, what I do is most of the time people contact me through the internet, and if they have something they want me to mix, I'll consider it. I'll listen to the music and see if there's something I can bring to it, first of all. And then we negotiate that. My manager negotiates schedule and budget. Luckily, I don't have to deal with that. Then, but sometimes I will try to stay relevant by doing a month of research, if I can get away with it. I'll sit down in front of the computer, read every blog or check every playlist to see what is being played and who's popular, if I can relate to that music at all, and try to connect with those people. If there's some new music happening and I want to be a part of it, I will write them and say, hey, if it's possible, I would love to mix a track for you. No charge. If you don't use it, great. If you use it, maybe we negotiate something. But at least I get a chance to work with some very interesting people that way and new cutting edge music. The other thing is I just try to find something that I like that maybe no one else has heard before. I will support artists that are unknown, but to a limit. It's kind of like puppies. You want to adopt every puppy because they're all cute, but you just can't adopt all the puppies. So I'll choose a few and I'll support them, but I certainly can't support all the new artists that I would like to, as much as I would like to. Anyway, so that's how I try to stay relevant, is I try to reach out and do research and get online and try to figure out what, back when there were festivals, like who's on the festival circuit, are these bands that I've heard of before, or what type of music is cutting edge? One thing I've noticed recently, which I'm very excited about, is music made by women. They're using programming and creating their own beats and creating all the instrumentation themselves, and they're making some amazing music. I worked with 3 women, independent women writers and artists this year. One is Sylvia, she's from Canada. One is Night Night, she's from LA but now from New York. Fantastic artists. And one is Chai. Now, Chai is an Iranian New Zealander who's doing her own music, which is unbelievable. Farsi rapping and really dark and mysterious beats. Sylvia is working on pop music, it's just a very unusual type of pop music, and she's doing all the music herself. It's fantastic. And then Night Night is goth, dark, lyrically engaging. All 3 very distinctly different types of music, but they're all doing it themselves. So I'm excited about that trend in women doing their own thing and writing and creating the music themselves. I also love organic music, like string sections, classical arrangements, and I try to do that as much as I can. Even in mixing, if I hear strings on a track that doesn't have strings, I have a guy, my friend Morgan O'Shaughnessy, who's a multi-instrumentalist, and I'll just say, Morgan, put some strings on this. I'll actually hum a melody that I want him to incorporate into the string arrangements. I send him the files, and he sends me back the finished string arrangements where he plays everything, including cello and the violin, viola. Fantastic. And that's a big surprise for some people who hire me for mixing, because they are not expecting to get that kind of grand treatment. Of course, they have to pay for it, but it's worth it. Let's see what other kind of questions we have. How can we get that old school Motown Beatles sound? Oh, you know what? That's something that I'm very excited about. And having, 2,000 microphones from various points in history can help with that. For one thing, the Motown was using, what were they using? There's a particular mic, and I'm trying to think of what it is, AKG mic, I think. Anyway, vintage ribbons, will give you a lot of that sound for not necessarily Motown, but a lot of the 50s music was made with ribbons, and you'll get this big, furry, warm sound using ribbons. Here's a couple of ribbons right behind me here that are just fantastic. If you don't know about them, now Andrew Sheps, he loves this ribbon, and I can understand why. This is an RCA KU3A ribbon mic. It's from the 50s. And this typically has a skunk stripe on it because when they used it for film, they wanted people to know what the front was and what the back was. So the skunk stripe is on the back. And this KU3A is a legend for vocals. Wow. Or for rooms, for string sections or whatever. Use a stereo pair. This is going to give you that vintage sound. The Beatles, however, used a lot of German mics for their recordings at Abbey Road. I think they were using a lot of U47 Neumanns and Telefunkens at Abbey Road, and I have some of those, but they're in the other room. But the early Beatles were using Reslow. And I think I have a Reslow here too. Let me see if I can grab a Reslow if it's available. Reslow, where are you? Well, I can't see it easily. Hang on. Here's a Reslow. These ribbons are made by an English company called Reslow. And this was a popular mic. Actually, the Beatles used this on stage, and then some in the studio too. But that is a Beatles mic right there. I think that if you, first of all, if you are using these types of microphones and incorporating older style mic preamplifiers, the vintage Neve, the 1073 is probably a good place to start, and they're available, or things close to the 1073s. Make sure that if you're using ribbons that you don't have phantom power on, because you will pop those little ribbons. So don't do that. But you'll get a lot of that kind of vintagey sound by using those ribbon mics or old tube condensers like the Neumann U47 or U67. And then recording on analog tape will also give you that kind of thing. A lot of early rock music or the Motown was also using chambers, live chambers, and plates like an EMT 250, 240 plate, which is there's some good emulations of those plugins these days. So plate sounds and chambers, real chambers. Boy, if you could make a real chamber, wow. And then tape slap too. Also, if you're able to create a tape slap, you can use the plugin, but wow, wouldn't it be much funner if you had it like a 1/4-inch tape machine and you created your own tape slap? Do it. All right, what else we got? I think we got enough time for a couple more questions. Hi, Peter. Let's see. And Francesco. There's so many friends that I made through Mix with the Masters. You know, these friendships that we make through these workshops last forever. You know, these people like Peter I met at a workshop, and I had Peter come over and help me record the Melvins. And then Francesco Genduso, he's been on trips with me to Castle Rohrsdorf to do some recording. And we met at Mix with the Masters in France. It's just a wonderful studio there. And the people are great. And every time I come to do workshops, I leave with a a dozen more friends that I continue to be friends with forever. I mean, really, and why not? You know, we're all just a family, even though we can't be in the same room together these days. We can certainly keep in touch. I appreciate that. And let's see. Oh, yes. Now, part of what we'll be doing with the museum here, the Microphone Museum, is we're going to be doing a video series called A Mic a Day. And that'll be fun because each one of these mics has such unique character and such a story behind them that we'll be able to really get in depth with it. And then we'll also be able to pump the sound of this, like particular the Breslow, into the video system, and so you can actually hear what it sounds like. We'll do that for, oh boy, we've got enough material to last 10 years, I think, or more. There's over 2,000 mics here. Wow. So yeah, stay tuned for that. I'll probably be doing that on my own with Chris, who we co-own the collection here. So be ready for that. That's going to be great. Plus, we are selling a good portion of the collection. There's a bunch of surplus, and I just started posting those ads online on eBay. So if you look for Sylvia Massy's audio shop, then you'll be able to see all the mics and other things that we're posting, because there's a bunch of radio, vintage radio, and other things that are also being sold, so that we can keep the core of the collection, which is fantastic. And let's see, what else can we talk about before I go? What time is it anyway? Oh, let's see. No, we've got some time. All right, let's look at some more questions. Let's see. What part of your job did it cost you the most to assimilate over the years? Oh, I'll tell you what. Now, in hindsight, I have no regrets. But there was a time in my life when I thought I would be a mom with a family, with a lot of kids. And that didn't happen because I was in the studio. And when you're in the studio, you're just like blinders on. There's one job and this is it. And so I missed out on that. But honestly, I've got a million children out there. So many young engineers that I've tutored and helped to get their start, and we're friends still. And so I don't really feel like I missed out on anything ultimately. But that is one thing that I gave up, is the idea that I would have a family with kids. And I think for women, this is an issue, because doing this job of producing is so all-encompassing that really you have to push out a lot of other things like social interaction, meeting people like in social situations. I mean, you can meet people in the studio, but it ain't cool to like, let's say, date the client or your boss. That could be a problem. So yeah, for women in the studio, you just have to be dedicated to what you love to do. And that's where I'm at still today. I love my job. I love producing, and it's everything to me. And the whole world of like microphones and recording is very exciting still and forever for me. So I'm not really missing out on anything except for maybe that. Anyway, that's an honest answer. All right, let's see what else we got. Hey, thanks. You're welcome. The sacrifice is real. And the RCA 74B against the Big Brothers. Wow. Well, the RCA 74B is a much smaller ribbon, and I have one right over here, and I'll just grab it. Let's see. This might actually be a 74A, but this guy is much smaller than the big brother, which is the 44. Yeah. Well, the 44 is actually out of reach right now. It's way up on the high shelf. But the 74, I think this is a 74A actually, or just a plain old 74 Junior. I have not tried it yet. I have not put them side by side to try, but the opportunity is there now. This has already been wired up for XLR, so that is on my list to try to see the difference between the 74 and the 44. Now, here's a very special thing in the museum collection, and I'll just grab it right here. So you'll recognize the shape of this mic to be very much like an RCA 44. In fact, this particular mic is the prototype for the 44 that Harry Olson designed. This is the actual prototype, and it's a working prototype too. So I'll be able to listen to this and see just how far they went when they took this prototype and then they made the production model. But apparently this works and it's great. And Harry Olson actually put his hands on this. Harry Olson was the developer of most of the RCA mics. Here's another special prototype. Now, the RCA 77 is another iconic microphone design. And this is a prototype for that 77. It was made in that same pill shape, but much flatter. And then ultimately, the 77 was round and more cylindrical. But this is the actual prototype for the 77. Isn't that awesome? Awesome. And then here's a really cool thing. Here, one more prototype for you for the RCAs. Hang on. This is an amazing, amazing collection. Now, I am sure that you know the RCA BK5A. Maybe you don't know it. It's a ribbon, but it's an end address ribbon. Let me show you. So this is a BK5A, very popular RCA end address ribbon mic. Sounds great on guitars. But the prototype, you'll see, was developed basically from the same design that they made for the 77. And this is the prototype for the BK77 or the BK5A, right? This is the prototype for this mic. And what Harry Olson did is he took it and he made it an end address. So in fact, the prototype for the BK5A is an end address. And if you look inside there, the ribbon is flat on this side. So that is what happened before the BK5. Isn't that neat? Ooh, watch out. Gotta be careful with these mics. Anyway, yeah, there's a lot of mics out there. Here's another really cool thing that I just figured this out the other day. Now, maybe I should have known this or studied or something, but so back in the day, there was a telephone. Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone in 1874, something like this. And the way you could hear was with a little handset like this, right? You had this little thing right here, and you were listening from the other room. You could hear the voice in the other room coming through this little teeny weeny earpiece. Well, later on, there was something called the loud-speaking telephone. Loud-speaking telephone. And the loud-speaking part was a horn like this, and I'll just grab it. So here's one of the early loud speaking telephones, right? This was the part that replaced that little earpiece. This was a loud speaking telephone. Now, I just figured this out. Maybe I should have known. But loud speaking telephones became loudspeakers. It was just the name was abbreviated loudspeaker. And then just speaker. So this is one of the earliest speakers. And this is where loudspeaker, the name came from loud speaking telephones. Isn't that incredible? All right. Is that enough? Let's see what other questions we have. Is that it for your Fest clinic? Oh, amazing. How many more in your studio, Bill? How many rooms in the studio, Bill? Well, the studio that I have here, which I showed you a little picture of, we have this is the new studio. The old studio is still here in the church up the road, but we're putting a vintage Trident in there, and then it'll be available to the public, which is great. But the new room is kind of my private little lair. We have the studio, we have the microphone museum in here, which you can come and visit by appointment. But the studio itself is in a big room. I love to do recording in the same room that the equipment is in. So we'll do open room recording in this big room. Plus, I've got a vocal booth and a bar. Chris is finishing the bar. It's an actual, awesome bar and a commercial kitchen. So this particular studio now will have 4 rooms. But then there's a whole other side of the building that we can wire in. I don't know. The whole thing is growing and growing and growing, but we're just trying to finish this one little piece right now. As soon as the console comes in, I'll start working again on mixes. I can't wait. But in the meantime, I've been doing microphone inventory and studying. Chris and I are finishing the great microphone book. It got sidelined when we bought this museum because everything I thought I knew about microphones needed to be updated. There's a lot that I've been learning since getting these the Paquette collection here. Bob Paquette collected from, how many years? 50 years of collecting microphones, and he has files and files and files on the history. He has documentation of some very amazing microphones, so I learn something new every day. So we're working on that book, and now that we're kind of isolated, we have a chance to really finish that book and make it great. So that's the other thing I'm working on. The studio will be multi-room, but it's right now it's just concentrating on one big room with the new Rupert Neve in it and Genelec monitors. I've got my huge giant 1036 A's in the wall, and then I've got 8351s down below, and I'll be getting some 8361s, some subs, and some other Genelec monitoring, hopefully getting an immersive setup in here. Can't wait. It's going to be great. Let's see. What other questions? And when mixing on a console, is it common to use high-pass filters, for example, to remove rumble from vocal recording? Sometimes. Not always, though. It depends on the recording, obviously. But I will use high-pass filters for guitar and for vocals. Typically vocals, because you can get rid of the boominess of some recordings. A lot of times the mixes that I get, the files that are sent to me, have been recorded in less than optimal recording environments. And so if you don't have good monitoring where you're recording, you won't be able to hear those especially low frequencies, and you might have a lot of them that you don't even know are there until they come into the mix room, and then I can hear them on my monitors, and then I have to dial it up. So I do that actually digitally, And if I'm mixing on an analog desk, then I will use that too. You're right. Yes. Let's see what other questions we have here. Could you give some advice on getting a solid, consistent bass in the mix? Wow. Compression. Well, I use compression. I like to go heavy-handed on bass compression. Often, I don't like the pumping thing, but I want consistency throughout the mix so that I can hear it. Sometimes I will use a EQ to bring out the upper mids or the mid-range frequencies to give it more presence without affecting the low end. And sometimes I'll even do a parallel track where I will add a distortion on it and then tuck that in there just to give it more presence. And that will help bring out the bass. And it can work for live bass. It can work for synth bass, to have that kind of, even a sawtooth kind of emulation on the bass so that you can really hear it. Of course, certain types of music, you don't want any of that. You just want a big round boomy thing. So it depends on the music, of course. All right, what else we got? All right. Any tips on mixing drums completely in the box? Ooh. It's tough. I think that here's a tip for you. All right. Start with everything at -30. Before you even start placing anything in your mix, open up all the tracks, bring them all down. -30. It sounds like a lot, but you've got bits to spare. So bring it all the way down. Now, as you add things in, you can bring it up a little bit here and here and here. But the problem with mixing in the box a lot is that you run out of headroom and everything sounds pinched. And that's the worst thing about mixing in the box, and it's a struggle. So I've just started, even hybrid mixing, I'll start with everything -30 and then add things in. And then I seem to have a lot more headroom. Things creep up, but at least I'm not pinching everything, not getting that horrible pinching sound where everything is just squeezed so much that it just hurts your ears. So that's my big piece of advice for that. So you can do that with drums in particular. Start with everything, just everything, and then start with your drums and then start building on that. And let's see. Compression. What if you don't want to use compression while tracking vocals? Well, you're a chicken shit. That's all I can say. I use compression, analog compression, when I track vocals, and I commit. You know, you can't be afraid, and you can't leave it for later. Go ahead and try it. Just go ahead. I use heavy compression too. A lot of times I'll use 2 compressors. Typically, I'll use a soft tubey kind of compression, like I have a 175B UA, which is fantastic tube analog compressor. And then on the tail end of that, I'll add a UA or a URI 1176. So I've got 2 compressors. One is slow and soft, and the other one is fast to get the transients. So I'll pair those, have the signal go through that, and I'll just make sure I don't want it to be completely crushed and pumping, but I want to control the dynamics. And this helps the singer too. And this is maybe the best reason for recording with compression, is because the singer will give you a completely different performance if they can hear even the quiet parts and the loud parts without struggling. If they're hearing the quiet parts because the compression brings it up, they will have more expression in those quiet parts. I suggest that you use compression when you're recording vocals. Now, Chris Lord-Alge has a certain way of doing things, which he talked to me about, and that is where he will add the compression on the playback of those tracks instead of on the way in. So he's still getting the effect of being able to hear the compression, and the artist also, the singer, will hear the effect without actually printing it that way. But I think it's chicken shit. I think you just have to do it. So get some balls, would you? Or some whatever you got. All right. Let's see. All right. Let's see what else we got. Thanks for your answer. Parallel compression. How do you manage parallel compression? Do you make another stem for compression tracks? Sometimes. Sometimes I use parallel compression. Typically, I'll just put a stereo bus compression on the whole mix as a final step on the way back in from my analog summing. And the ones that I use typically will be UA plugins for that. I used to have my own Fairchild 670, and I like and am very familiar with that sound. It gives it a very finished sound. The UA emulation is pretty close. In fact, I think I went side by side with the emulation when my 670 was on the blink. And I was in the middle of a mix, and I had to use the plug-in instead of the analog thing. And I was able to get through the whole mix. Half of it was done on a plug-in, half of it was done on hardware. And it was convincing enough that I'm not afraid to use the plug-in version. It's pretty good. So I typically will use that now if I need it. Sometimes I use the analog, the dangerous music compression instead. And I like that too. I love compression. All right, what else we got? Oh, goodness, all right. Someone thought I was rude. All right. Let's see. Consistent, completely in the box, mixing drums complete. Here's one thing to try if you're looking for a new place to record. You can record anywhere if you have a device like this. And this is something I carry with me when I travel. Of course, I'm grounded right now, but when I travel, I carry this with me because so many possibilities for recording. Here is the Mix Pre 10, and this is by Sound Devices. It has 8 mic pre's and individual controls for each mic, and it's battery operated, so you can take it anywhere. It's self-contained. It has onboard software, multi-track software, so you can do multi-tracking wherever you're at. Now I've used this. I went down into the London Underground in an abandoned tube station with a band called Goddamn, and we recorded drums in the abandoned tube station with this. And then I brought it back and dumped it into my Pro Tools and continued to track. It was fantastic. And you can take this anywhere. So you don't have to have shore power. It's all battery operated. Plus, this also acts as an interface for Pro Tools. So if you have a laptop and you want to have this as your interface, this works too. So you can have a laptop off the grid and a battery operated interface. This is something that I think is the next big technology breakthrough. Will be a manufacturer who makes a multi-input interface with 16 ends instead of just 8. This is 8. This is good. 16 would be better. 24 would be even better. Anyway, I highly recommend the Mix Pre 10. It's very handy. And it'll take you places you never went before. All right. Are there any more good questions here? Seattle. Mixing an album. When mixing an album, how much time do you like to allow to complete the task? All right. So when I mix, typically I schedule 1 day per song. And the first song on a project, let's say I'm mixing an entire album, the first song will take the most time. And then I use that as a template for songs on the album that are similar with a similar instrumentation. So 1 day per song. I like to have that elbow room. There's always going to be some revisions coming back. But typically, if I'm scheduling and looking to create a budget for a project, I like to allow for a 1 day per song budget. And sometimes that day is 10 hours. Sometimes it's 8 hours. It just depends. But yeah, 1 day per song. Sometimes things go quicker, but I don't like to start with less time. I like to have more time, and then if I don't need that extra time, then I don't need it. It's great. Anyway, that's how I think. All right. Well, we've been doing this for about an hour, and I'm wondering if I think that might be it for me. Maybe one more question. Okay, one more. Let's see what we got. When mixing on analog desk combined with in the box, what would be your routing approach? Analog, when mixing on an analog desk combined with, okay. Well, I used to do this on my vintage Neve, and I would make stems on the desk. So I'd have 8 pairs of faders up, pan stereo. And just like I would do now with my analog summing box, I would have those faders all in one line, and left, right, 8 pairs. And then the first pair would be my drums. Second pair would be the bass, typically. Third pair might be guitars or piano or something like that. All right. So then each of those pairs, each of those stems could have its own compression, overall EQ. But the heavy lifting I would do in the box, using EQ on individual channels before it went out to the desk. And the thing that I like the most about that type of mixing is that, especially on the Neve, I could use the onboard 2254s for compression on the last step. So I could pop in my stereo bus insert and add the loop trotter, Emperor stereo bus compression, and GML EQ in that way, or the 2254 compression on the desk. But that's the best reason for mixing on a desk with a hybrid approach. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for joining me here for Mix with the Masters. It's a great organization. I'm glad to be a part of it. And we have to do this again sometime. Also, stay tuned for more stuff about mics. There's going to be a lot of talk about mics on video. So stay tuned for that. And check out my eBay store. For sure, you're going to want some mics for your own collection. And take care. Stay healthy. Enjoy yourself. All right. Bye-bye.